I'm launching a new podcast series on December 27th. So what? But first, a confession. I had this big idea for the basic broadcast. I was going to do a limited run, 30-day podcast series where I published every day a video and audio version of the podcast. And I was going to show you how you could do it simply and sustainably and then repurpose it to all the places to make your wildest dreams come true. But after working through clarity questions that I send new clients when we're working on their podcast launch and answering some of the questions for myself that I ask potential clients, I realized that this was a terrible idea and I would be a nightmare client. How could I be a shining example for you of how to create a sustainable podcast when I was totally setting myself up for failure? There was absolutely nothing that was simple or sustainable about this idea. In the past, I would have just pushed through and then flamed out about 10 days or so into it because I would have been exhausted, frustrated, and overwhelmed, and then sad because I had another failed experiment. So let's get back to answering the burning question, so what? Let's start by talking about what this podcast series is not. It's not best practices, tools, tips, trends, tricks, growth hacks. You've got all those other podcasts and YouTube channels for that. We are deconstructing the practice of podcasting, focusing on 3 key areas, and that is clarity, consistency, and connection. Because those 3 core areas of your podcast are what is going to actually grow your impact, influence, and income from your show. No clarity equals no focus. No focus equals you're spinning your wheels and you're just stuck and then you're frustrated that you're not getting growth. But hey, you could go try the latest social media trend to grow your audience. Do you really want to chase social media trends? We're going to look at clarity in our purpose, clarity in our process, clarity in our messaging, and consistency. Consistency is huge. Delivering consistently on your promise builds trust with your audience. And maybe even more importantly, when you are consistently delivering on that promise to publish, you're building trust and confidence in yourself. Have you broken any promises to yourself in the past? Maybe you promised yourself months ago that you were going to start a podcast, but that microphone's still sitting on the shelf somewhere. This podcast is a practice for me to keep the promise to consistently deliver an episode every week. And then there's connection. How do we make our podcast more relevant, resonant, and relatable to our audience? Relatability is crucial if you want to build connection with your audience. And I approach relatability from a songwriter's viewpoint, so I can't wait to dive into that. Podcasting is a practice in consistency. And this podcast series for the entire year of 2025 is my commitment to that process and that practice, and my commitment to you to show up. This podcast is the cornerstone of the content that I plan on creating for the entire next year. Here's what to expect. These are going to be short, no-frills, 10-minute episodes. 10 minutes is the max. 10 minutes is a parameter that I set for myself because it's sustainable and it's going to help me be consistent in what I'm producing every week. Like I said earlier, this isn't about tips, tricks, and hacks. You're going to get insight from a woman that has been working in podcasting for over 10 years, and I am in the trenches with you as a business owner, as a creator, trying to run all of the business things while still creating and producing a podcast consistently over the next year. All those frustrations and pains that you feel, I feel them too. This series is called The Basic Broadcast because there are no fancy bells and whistles or post-production magic. There's no music or sound effects unless it's something that I can do live while I'm recording. Fortunately for me, I'm a musician with lots of noise-making capability. And for fun, expect me to sing you a song periodically. I mean, I was raised on Schoolhouse Rock and VH1 Storytellers. Sometimes it just takes a song to make your point. The podcast episode is really just the start of a conversation. Leave comments, leave questions. I want to hear from you about what your experience has been regarding the topic that we're talking about in the episode. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you can actually leave comments and questions on each episode. And you can hear the audio version wherever you're listening to your podcasts. I'm going to leave you with one practice to get you started before we officially launch this baby on December 27th. But first, if you're already subscribed to the Brassy Broadcast podcast, look for the new artwork that says The Basic Broadcast. That is going to be specific to this series for the next year. If you're already subscribed to the Brassy Broadcast, you're going to see a change in the podcast cover art. It's going to be very basic and say The Basic Broadcast, and you'll know that you are in the right place. Here's your first practice. Write down why it's important to you to start this podcast or whatever creative project you're planning on starting this year. Maybe you're going to write a book, but why is it important for you to do it now? Why is this the perfect time? Are you ready to live in the ears, heads, and hearts of your audience? It's time to get clear, consistent, and connected. I'll be waiting for you in your podcast feed on December 27th with the first full episode. And in that episode, I'm going to be sharing with you how I actually got clarity for this podcast series and how I plan to deliver on my promise to publish every week. Thanks for tuning in. Now get out in the world and do some good.